I had the great privilege of serving for General Sullivan when he was the chief, and it's always great to be with him. And General Formica here in the front row. It's good to see you again. We heard this morning from General Vaya about the incredible responsibilities and capabilities of Army Materiel Command, and he also shared with us the enormous challenges that command and his part of the Army is going to face in the next several years. So I think the panel, optimizing the global supply chain, optimizing DoD supply chain, is very appropriate, because it's going to be very important to optimize the supply chain to get the efficiencies and the improved readiness performance for the United States Army going forward. I will say a couple things about the panel members here. Ray Scheibel to my immediate right, Vice President at LMI, distinguished Army career before he went to LMI. He spent several years with LMI doing operational logistics, helping the Army solve some of the big issues it faces in logistics, but was a career Army officer, logistics officer, Transportation Corps, Vietnam veteran, distinguished service in his own right. To his right, Perry Widener, not only in her current role as Senior Executive Vice President for Rotorcraft Systems, but before that, she ran the entire operation down in Huntsville, Alabama for Boeing Integrated Defense Systems. And we're very happy that she flew in from Europe just to make this panel, so appreciate that very much. Scott Rossbaugh, 27 years with DLA, worked for me when I was at DLA. Credits his total success in supply chain management to General Kyer. Unfortunately, that success did not translate to his golf game, but it's great that we could reunite you guys today. And of course, Lynn Kyer at the end there, Commander of AMCOM. If you look at his general officer assignments, not only has he helped create the requirements and capabilities in TRADOC as a commandant at the Ordnance School, but then supplied the supply chains in DLA to those systems and capabilities, and now he's working at the national level with Army Materiel Command. So Glenn, we're very proud of you, and thanks for being here. What I want to do is open this up and turn it over to Ray Scheibel. He's going to present the short pitch, and upon that pitch, the rest of the panel members will make comment. And we'll invite your questions, and we'll look forward to hearing those questions, and I've got a few up here to start it when we get to the question and answer period. So Ray,
okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, General Dale, and appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel. My company, LMI, has been providing DoD and the Army independent and objective and unbiased advice on logistics and supply chain analysis since we were formed in 1961, so we've been around for a while. Our current CEO, the Honorable Nelson Ford, former Undersecretary of the Army, sends his greetings to all his friends here. He is a big supporter of AUSA, and appreciate that he sends his greetings to you all. We believe that this is a time, obviously, to revisit the Army supply chain design and strategies given the new realities that we are facing. I intend to set the scene here for our discussion and raise the issues we want to discuss on optimizing the supply chain. Next slide. What is this new reality? Well, we've been talking a lot about it the last 2 days. We are at the end of 10 years of high op-tempo in our supply chains, as you know, supporting Iraq, Afghanistan, and the global war on terror. The current supply chains are designed to serve this high op-tempo, the requirements thereof. As we know, in the near future, the requirements will decline. With the drawdown, particularly after we're finished in Afghanistan, the reduced and constrained budgets we're talking about. We heard yesterday that the Army just this year alone is facing a $18 billion shortfall. And the reduced op-tempo as the nature of operations changes. General Cohn mentioned yesterday that in the future the Army is going to be more expeditionary, deploying from home stations, working to areas that are austere, that have anti-port and anti-access situations with them. So the whole nature of the operations are going to be changing, and our supply chains are going to have to adapt to that. The challenge facing the Army is maintaining an effective supply chain and the healthy supply base in light of the reduced requirements. Specifically, how to design the Army supply chains around the new demand and distribution patterns, how to adjust the mix of organic and contractor operations as manpower returns from the overseas locations, how to ensure key suppliers remain financially viable despite reduced Army demands. and this is a key point. I've been talking to several suppliers over the last day and a half that are in the audience today, and their basic message to me was that uncertainty is worse than dealing with a known budget or requirement decline. They can much better plan for the latter situation than they can for undefined uncertainty. How to ensure the industrial base maintains production capabilities when the Army has to suspend or limit buys in order to draw down their inventories. I saw in the paper a note that the Pentagon contracts in January alone fell 67% from the contracts that were delivered and executed in December. So we're already feeling the impact of the new reality as DoD prepares for their budget cuts. Next slide. Optimizing the supply chain is not just process improvements. This triangle shows that it really starts with the supply chain strategy in the middle and extends to the elements of the supply chain, the people, the processes, and the technologies that comprise the supply chain. All components are important and have to be addressed in balance. But optimization really starts with the strategy. And as this new reality takes hold, we have to address how the priorities for the Army supply chain change. A well-defined strategy will design a supply chain that leads the people, processes, and technology in the right direction towards optimization. When you don't focus on strategy first, you end up with incremental improvements that don't solve the overarching problem. Next slide. At LMI, we view supply chains operations through a lens of a model called the SCORE model. SCORE stands for the Supply Chain Operations Reference Model. Most of you are probably familiar with this. It has been used by supply chain managers since 1996 to structure and guide supply chain analysis. The Supply Chain Council owns the SCORE model, but there are many users. It is a proven analytical framework for evaluating, improving, and managing supply chain performance across almost every industry. It facilitates one's ability to identify and correct supply chain performance shortfalls, leading to reduced costs and increased customer service improvements. It is also, as an aside, recently been adapted to measure environmental impacts of the supply chain by measuring greenhouse emissions on each node along the supply chain. It's called Green Score. Most recently, it's also been adapted for assessing risks or fragility and vulnerabilities along the supply chain for such events as potentials for natural disasters, geographic political instability, labor disputes, transportation congestions and constraints, all of which can affect the effectiveness of the supply chain. So my point here is that it's an invaluable tool to use as we try to optimize our supply chains. SCORE, as you see on this slide, breaks the supply chain down into 5 primary processes: plan, source, make, deliver, and return. Planning is the design of the supply chain and balancing of supply and demand. Sourcing, the procurement of and receipt of goods, including managing supplier relations, which is very important. Make, obviously, the production and assembly of goods. To deliver is to store, transport, and distribute the finished goods and to build relationships. Return is the reverse logistics operation for faulty and excess goods as well as for maintenance and repair processes, or retrograde as we're seeing now. So in rethinking the supply chain for the new reality, we believe we need to focus on the front end of these processes in planning and sourcing in particular. First, with the requirements and sourcing and resources both declining, it is important to rethink the Army supply chain design and how one uses supply chain resources, both internal and external capabilities, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on in the discussion. Secondly, you also need to be mindful of the impact of the supply base. This is the sourcing process. Managing relationships with suppliers and determining when and how much to buy is critical. Second and third tier suppliers, we think, are particularly at risk in the future in this new reality. It is important to note that there is an interrelationship between all 5 SCORE processes. So when we talk about plan and source, we need to recognize the impact of a new plan on the supply base could provide feedback and trigger another plan iteration. In other words, it's a continuous process that demands collaboration and communications. Next slide. So we need to think of the supply chain as an end-to-end unified process, in order to not sub-optimize any particular node along the supply chain depicted here. When we view it as a single process, we focus on how all the players can work together to satisfy the end requirement at the lowest cost. First, Bill? But we also need to understand that the Army supply chain is a network of organizations working together to bring the two frames of reference together. From the Army's perspective, the focus is on maintaining readiness for the lowest overall cost. Next, Bill. The supply base, on the other hand, tends to focus on return on investment and risk. Financial resources are flexible for companies. They'll apply them where they can get the biggest potential payback at the lowest risk. Companies have various avenues, obviously, for dispersing their financial resources. They seek attractive investment opportunities, but they can also simply give dividends back to their shareholders when there's no attractive investment opportunity there. Now, don't get me wrong, suppliers are very patriotic and happy to support Army readiness objectives, of course, but they need to see an ROI and understand the risk in order to make business decisions. Third, Bill? So optimizing the supply chain, therefore, needs to include how we bridge these two frames of reference and create aligned expectations and outcomes that support Army readiness and supplier return on investment. In other words, there needs to be a dialogue between the Army and its suppliers that includes the outlook for requirements, the areas of uncertainty, and the risks the suppliers see in continuing to supply the Army. We heard yesterday about the DoD program called Better Buying Power 2.0. This proposes to engage industry and to incentivize innovation, engage industry on requirements, and identify processes levied on contractors that can be eliminated because their costs outweigh their benefits. So we believe that DoD is starting to think along the lines of increased engagement, which we believe is a good thing. Next slide. So I wanted to give an example of a misalignment, just to show one example. There are many, but this is the one on Cisco. It's a good example from Cisco's supply chain in the year 2000. Next, Bill. As you know, Cisco sells networking and switching equipment, all these things that make the Internet and the phone system work. Leading up to 2000, Cisco's business was booming, riding the dot-com boom with great success. Demand was steadily rising. Cisco uses contract manufacturing for almost all of their products. So as demand increases, suppliers would build subassemblies ahead of demand to allow faster responses to Cisco orders. They were particularly rewarded for fast deliveries, so there was an incentive to build subassemblies ahead of demand to capture the quick response incentives. Next, Bill. As we know, we saw in the first half of 2000 that the dot-com boost started to go bust. As tech companies started to fail and run short on cash, Cisco's orders declined significantly. Unfortunately, Cisco did not communicate well with their suppliers on the drop in demand, so suppliers continued to produce the subassemblies in anticipation of the level of orders that they were experiencing. So Cisco and the suppliers did not have clear clauses in their agreements to deal with ownership of the inventory that was not used. Suppliers argued that the inventory was Cisco products and therefore belonged to Cisco, whereas Cisco argued the opposite. Well, the end result was Cisco had to write off $2.5 billion in inventory, a significant hit on their company's revenue. So, the third bill. So how well is the Army aligned to this new reality dealing with their suppliers? That's what we want to discuss today. Next slide. The strategic elements of optimization. Achieving an optimized supply chain we see it 4 strategic elements. One needs to address them right up front. Situational awareness is always key. Understanding the incentives that drive organic and commercial organizations in the supply chain, including performance expectation and external market forces. Collaboration. Fostering strong, trust-based relationships where the Army and suppliers can plan and execute the supply chain together and communicate openly. Visibility and transparency, a shared operating picture of the supply chain so everyone, organic and commercial, shares the same forecast, plan, and operating picture as needed for their piece of the supply chain. And then clear incentives, clear goals, incentives, and penalties together with long-term relationships to support a more clear ROI and encourage investment in the supply chain. Next slide, last slide. So, in summary, a renewed focus on supply chain management is needed to address the challenges of the new reality. Collaborative planning and forecasting is a must. Strengthened partnerships with increased transparency and checks and balances should be a priority. The bottom line is that proper alignment of strategy, people, processes, and technologies across Army and supplier operations will improve readiness and ROI while lowering everyone's risk exposure. We believe this is a win-win situation that can be achieved and will reap even more benefits to all stakeholders in the supply chain. So it's been a pleasure participating in this panel today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Ray. Perry?
Good morning. It's a privilege to be here, especially with this distinguished panel. So thank you for the invitation. Just a word on who we are and what we do. General Dale was far too discreet to tell you that I've been with Boeing Company for 33 years. So
You can understand why I didn't want to maybe go
so
there.
I'll share that
Thank you.
Piece of information. And over that time, I've had an opportunity to work in all of our businesses, as well as in Washington, D.C. So it's been a particular privilege the last few years to lead this global business for rotorcraft support. We are a global business, so within my portfolio, all of our rotorcraft support, all of our customers anywhere in the world. And we take a holistic approach to that, so it's a through-life support. That means something different depending on what customer you are. For the U.S. Army, it means we've got an operation in Millville, New Jersey. At Fort Campbell, we do the 160th and have had a very productive partnership with my friends at Sikorsky for the last couple of decades, a joint venture there actually. And then, of course, we've got operations in Philly and Mesa and our Huntsville headquarters. We are then fundamentally in the service business. So now, about today. So Mr. Scheibel talked about the supply chain. The supply chain is absolutely fundamental to what we do. It is the base upon which we build our service. What I'm going to talk about this morning, though, is a holistic approach to managing in today's environment life cycle costs. So, you know, we are at a moment in time where we've got a brand new reality facing us. The op tempos over the last few years have been higher in Army aviation than they have ever been in history. At the same time, the budgets have been reduced, and as we look forward, you know, we're looking forward to op tempos that will be reduced and budgets that will be reduced. So that provides an opportunity. You know, new thinking is going to be required. It is going to ask of us in industry and in the government to make some fundamental changes about how we go about our work. So given that sustainment is, and it, you know, it kind of depends on what numbers you look at, but let's just say for the sake of today's argument, sustainment's at least 70% of the cost of sustaining a product. So whatever you pay for a product, 70% of a platform acquisition cost over its life is given over to sustainment. We know, and I'm going to share some of this data with you, we know the data says if we can contract in performance-based or outcome-based or metric-based ways, we can give you back at least 20% of that cost. That's not an overstatement. It's probably an understatement based on our experience. Now, as an OEM, we do have a unique situation where we are able to address the entire life cycle system for our products. And for Boeing, the interesting piece of that is that we also bring our commercial business to this fight as well as our defense business. So, for example, there are some new places in the world where we are just beginning to work in terms of support to the U.S. government, places in Africa, places in Asia, places in the Middle East that have not been open to trade in the defense sector. However, we've had people in our commercial business on the ground in those places sometimes 2 and 3 decades. That's how long it takes to sell a commercial airplane. So why do I share that with you? Well, it does, part of doing business in this new world is understanding the cultures, the relationships that it's going to take to do these businesses and to have these global supply chains that enable us to do what we need to do for the U.S. government. So leveraging existing relationships, production buys and processes. We need to make an investment one time, not multiple times. So when we are dealing with, you can pick a part or you can pick a business. So I'll just pick GE or Honeywell. We deal with those people on our commercial businesses as well as in our defense businesses. So why shouldn't we leverage that power across that whole business and bring a better buying power to the government? We can do that, and we can take advantage of our capability to reach back to the Boeing company for assistance, whether it's engineering, whether it's publications, whether it's a supply chain system, a field service report. Let's just invest in those systems one time. There's no need for every PM or every PEO to pay for that system separately. Finally, working with AMCOM, Aviation Logistics Center, to increase data transparency, manage risk, and we touched on that just a bit, and jointly identify areas early. That creates a more efficient supply chain system that does enable us to optimize readiness at a lower cost. So let me give you just one quick example, and that is at CCAD. So there are several industry partners at Corpus Christi Army Depot. Boeing is one of those. Recently, the U.S. government implemented a new information technology system there called LMP, a great step forward in terms of transparency within the government. We recognized early on, though, that LMP was designed to optimize U.S. government systems, not necessarily industry systems, and so we recognized that we needed to build an interface to that system. That took some doing and some agreements, but the government stepped up and allowed us to do that. And we invested almost $1 million of our own money in that interface. Well, what is the result of that today? Well, today we've got transparency across the entire supply chain down there. We know how to model and forecast that system. It has right-sized the inventory. There has been a significant reduction in the inventory that the U.S. government is holding at CCAD in these parts. And perhaps the best metric of success is that last year, and I know all of you will know what this means when I say it, last year our buyback was in the low single digits, whereas in past years it's been double digits higher. And that's all because we were able to work together. We had the transparency necessary to optimize the supply chain. Okay. There's another way then, besides just these targeted or what I would call tactical ways to optimize affordability and supply chain. You can look at a life cycle affordability. And now I'm going to talk for just a moment on performance-based outcomes. And as budgets really get tighter, platforms stay in service longer. So whether you want to talk about a B-52, a Chinook, or an AV-8, one way to address these supply chain issues, obsolescence, diminishing resources, is through a performance-based agreement. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, first of all, a performance-based agreement transfers the risk to industry. At the same time you're transferring risk, you're also contracting for finite dollars. So your dollars become very predictable, which is important in this type of an environment. But that's not easy. And over time, there has been a lot of pushback on that because where you optimize these are typically with 3, 5, or longer year agreements. People don't like multi-year agreements for sustainment. My question is, why not? In today's environment, if we can do a multi-year agreement for a platform and that's 30% of a life cycle cost, Why shouldn't we be looking at multi-year agreements for sustainment when it's 70% or higher of a life cycle cost? And yeah, you've got to sit down and say, it might require an innovative acquisition approach, but I can tell you the infrastructure's there to support it. Just have to find a way to yes. And there are ways to put clauses in these agreements that allow us to deliver predictable performance at lower cost. But we have to be willing to do that. So let me give you two examples. One is an international example. One is a domestic example. We happen to have, actually I have responsibility for running the through-life support for the Chinook and the Apache fleets in the United Kingdom. We have a 34-year agreement in the United Kingdom. We would not do that in the United States. However, the lesson here is we've built an agreement in that says we reopen that every 5 years. And we share the improvements in performance that have been made through lean, through supply chain improvements, through engineering and product improvements. And for the first 5 years of that program, aircraft availability was 10% above requirement, serviceability was 95% against a requirement of 70%. Now this is a small fleet of less than 50 aircraft. The availability increase allowed an increase in flying hours of over 50%, so it was a historical high for that fleet, and which increased the fleet size by 3 to 4 aircraft. That is better buying power. Now, a domestic example is the Apache PBL. Army Aviation has done a fabulous job with this. Total ownership cost over the last 7 years has been reduced 24% because of the metrics that we have on that, and that reflects a $100 million cost savings since January of '07. And then obsolescence management there have been 397 case closures in obsolescence management, which has translated to almost $9 million in cost containment. So in closing, I'd like to just offer you this, that in today's dynamic and challenging environment, it requires asymmetrical business approaches. And we can do this. We can be more affordable, we can have less risk for the government, and we can offer more predictability. But we're going to have to use this as an opportunity to rethink how we do that business. We're going to have to be open to taking some new ideas and leaning forward in the acquisition process. We're going to have to ask this question about, what about multi-year for sustainment? And this is a seize-the-moment time in our history together, and we can do this and deliver quality at the same time. So thank you for your attention. I appreciate being here this morning.
Thanks very much, Perry.
Thank you.
Bob?
Very good. Good morning, and thank you, General Dale, for hosting this very timely topic. I appreciate that in the comments. As you see on the slide on the screen there, it's the new reality. With General Vai's speech this morning, it became very clear that it's not the new normal. There's nothing normal about this, and I appreciate the comments to that. On behalf of Admiral Arnachek and General Davidson, DLA looks to be your partner as we work through these challenges together. And I want to say that with over $40 billion in sales as your logistics partner last year, as a combat support agency, we look to work through these challenges all with you. Really, when it gets down to it, and if you take a look at the slide, the challenges are ahead of us. We can leverage the last 10 years as we look to meet these challenges. It starts with the requirements on the left-hand side of the slide. That's the key piece. The sooner we know what it is we want to do with the limited budget dollars that we have, the better we will be at being able to meet those requirements. That comes through effective communication. The key word there is effective communication. What it means is we understand what it is you want as a customer. We're able to articulate that to our supply base, and at the same time, we change our behaviors to be able to meet it. The practices of the past are not going to be able to meet the challenges as we face limited budgets and obviously the additional challenges as we face down the road with sequestration, et cetera. So I wanted to share that at large. You see the drawdown there. That's a key piece. As General Vice said this morning, we'll look to bring that back. We're doing it relatively quickly. The key is visibility of that as it comes back. It can be a supply chain multiplier as we leverage what we already have, gain control of it, and be able to leverage it against some of the future requirements as they emerge. I share that with the group. Other things that worked in the past may work here. Up-tempo's down. We're going to have to meet that challenge. Up-tempo was high for the last 10 years. Leveraging the success that we had to meet the surges, OIF, OEF, et cetera, and those partnerships will really allow us to be able to meet the future challenges as op-tempo goes down. Those partnerships are solid. It's solid with both our industry partners and our supply chain partners and national strategic partners such as Transcom. It's important that we do that. I think if we do that, then we'll obviously be able to leverage those successes to help mitigate some of the issues as they arise. A couple examples, and I've seen this, is the visibility piece. Gaining visibility is the key. The quicker, the better. I happened to be in Europe when the Army sold back excess sustainment material to DLA, about $3 million worth. The next morning I happened to be there when the back orders were shotgunning out to the other services. Visibility across the national spectrum provides even more opportunity as we move down and to meet these challenges under constrained budgets. I share that inside DLA distribution, we are optimizing the network. I share that such that BRAC 2005, we reduced 15.1 gross million square feet as a result of BRAC 2005. In order to maintain and continue to optimize the network, we're reducing 2.3 million gross square feet a year over the next 5 years. No BRAC driving that, tightening up the footprint, less material, we're getting rid of and disposing of the unnecessary assets. At the same time, we're improving the infrastructure that we're going to retain, getting rid of the older, less efficient infrastructure as we move forward. It's our commitment as a logistics partner to be able to provide the network that will lead to maintaining and in most cases decreasing the overall cost to our partners as we move forward. End of day, it's important that we work towards agile and flexible solutions. I can tell you from the DLA perspective that will involve deeper and deeper industry partners in those solution sets. Our enduring presence in the Middle East will be in Bahrain, and it will be through a contractor-owned, contractor-operated relationship. That provides us the agile, flexible distribution network to meet the point solution today and adjust it as time moves forward. Long-term commitments into permanent infrastructure will be a thing of the past. As emerging weapon system platforms and the logistics support to those emerge, we'll continue to look for those agile, flexible, and modular solution sets with our industrial partners. That's what I have for you this morning. I appreciate your time, and I'll turn it over to General Collier.
General Collier.
Sir, thank you. Sir, first, I want to start off by thanking General Dale for moderating and for the other panel members that are here with me. What our intent was today, and if you can go on back to the first chart, please. Okay, you can stay 1 second on it. That's what we intended to do was let Ray through LMI talk a little bit about some of the best business practices and put the brief together, and then each of us in our own way, Perry representing industry and Scott representing DOD and myself representing the Army, talk about the differences. And you've heard some things. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of what they've said and why the Army is or is not doing it or what we are doing. So I will go through basically all of the same kind of slides, the same slides that Ray went through, and just make some additional comments on how it affects each of us. I thank all of you as industry partners for being here. I thank all of our coalition forces partners for being here too, because there are several places in here that I need to make comments about you also and the way we support you. So first on this slide, I got to say that if you go back to Tom Spohr, the PA&E's brief yesterday, if you look at the numbers, even though that blue bar goes down with the budget, our budget's still almost $500 billion. That's a lot of money. The difference is that money's not going to be handed to you, that we have to work for the money, and we've got to decide where the right places to put money is. We can't afford to just throw money at problems or to look for solutions, multiple solutions. We've got to find the right solution and put the right amount of money to it, because that's the only way we'll do that. But there is still a lot of money out there. So this isn't all gloom and doom that we're all going down and the Army's going to go away. There's a lot of money out there to allow us to do the things that we have to do. And the key to this first chart, too, is on the left side, that requirements. And Scott talked about it. It's up to the Army to decide what the requirements are and to generate those requirements. And then I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next chart, I think. But it is up to us to determine what the requirements are. It's not up to industry to determine it or our joint partners. In some ways that we work very closely with our COCOM partners as we support the joint warfighter to do that. But it is our responsibility to determine those requirements. One of the things on the drawdown that I'll tell you, the Chief of Staff of the Army's guidance is that we will bring everything in the supply chain back from Afghanistan that we will ever have an opportunity to need in the future. That's pretty important for all of us to understand, because that means that we paid for that under one set of funding now, OCO, and it's what we don't want to do is leave something somewhere that may be needed in the future and have to rebuy it again with a scarce OMA money that we will have left to do that. So that means something to the industry out here, and that if we bring it all back, what was, with that drawdown and that op tempo going down, what was 6 months of supply may turn out to be 2 or 3 years worth of supply. So how do we maintain the industrial base capabilities as we draw down 2 or 3 years of supply and utilize that, but keep our manufacturers in business? And to do that, we need to do several of the things that all of my other panel members have talked about. I personally, from the aviation side of Army Material Command, are most worried in that case about critical safety items. I can't afford for companies to go out of business that it takes 2 to 3 or up to 2 years to certify a new company to make a critical safety item. So it is very, very important to us to draw down our stocks at the same time maintaining the economic viability of our partner industries. And in order to do that, there's several opportunities or options that are available to us. One of the things that Ray mentioned was shooting 50-meter targets. You know, every time we hear, Congress says we may push off sequestration, this may happen, that may happen. I will tell you from my viewpoint, the sooner we get the decisions, all of the decisions, the sooner we can make the best holistic solution to the problem. Instead of shooting a 50-meter target and saying, based on this cut today, this is what I'm not going to do, and getting a separate cut or a separate ad next month and then the month after that, we will suboptimize our decisions if we don't get as many of those decisions from above us at the same time so that we can truly optimize. DLA, Scott just talked about getting rid of space. They can only get rid of space if the services do the right things and work through what Perry talked about of buying the right items. As we get rid of items that are obsolete or dormant or don't use anymore, if we just fill them back up, we haven't done anything useful. And that's up to us again in working through the requirements, and it goes back to Perry's visibility, and in their case, as a company, setting up an interface that allows us to do that more effectively. Next slide, please. So on the supply chain, and when I talk about requirements, first of all, the Army has a good strategy, and I think that is important, as Ray stated. We have a good strategy. The logistics modernization program that was mentioned by Perry is a very good system, but it's not complete yet. We don't have all the modules that will allow us to be as effective and efficient as we ultimately will be. We don't even have all those interfaces with Army systems yet, let alone with our DoD partners and with our partners in industry. But it's very, very important that we do that, and I think we will get there over time. The biggest challenge is we could really use that today based on what we're facing, not another 18 months down the line when those things will be hopefully available to us. And that really goes from the strategy over the technologies. We are developing the technologies. DLA was the first DoD enterprise to actually field an enterprise business solution, and it is very expensive and very, very difficult. The Army is on their heels with LMP and with GCSSA. Again, very effective systems, but when we get both of those systems, we need to ensure that they have full interface and visibility across all of them. And that's some of the processes. There's a lot of processes that we can do to improve the way we execute the different functions that we have. And as General Vai talked about earlier, people, this is all about people to effectively operate all of them. And it's not just inside Army people, it's DOD people, it's you all and the people that you have that allow us to do these, the supply chain effectively. Next slide, please. You know, this is an interesting chart because basically we all use the same portions of this. What I, again, go back to is it's up to the Army to set the right requirements. And then each one of these steps, it's up to us to go back in with our partners to develop what those requirements are, the best contracting solutions and the best ways to execute that, whether it's in-house production, whether it's utilizing companies, different companies or OEMs or whatever. It's up to the Army to do it up front and then gather with our partners to see the best way to execute it. And it starts with viable contracts. As Perry said, long-term contracts can provide a significantly more effective or efficient solution. If you go to the next slide, please. Build this out. One of the things that we've got to do here is figure out how we can make that red space in the middle bigger. How we can bring those two circles closer together to make more of that overlap. You know, this is a pretty good definition of the problem. But Perry talked about the 30-70. 30% of a system is in procurement, 70% is in sustainment or life cycle. You know, in reality, in the aviation systems, we're going to keep those systems for 40 or 50 years. So that 30-70 is really more like 10-90 in many cases. So what that shows you, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. I oftentimes hear that as a bad, as something that's terrible. We got all that money into sustainment. So what it really tells you is you've got to be very cognizant of the sustainment piece as you're developing the system up front. If you know that procurement cost is only 10%, what can I develop into the procurement that allows me to be more effective in the sustainment side? And many of those means commonality with that civilian-like item. How can I use that same part that Boeing is going to make for a civilian aircraft on my military aircraft? Or how can I use common items across multiple platforms? That's the kind of thing we have to do. And right now I'll tell you that inside the Army we are very integrated as far as PEOs, AMCOM, other LCMCs from AMC are very integrated with our PEO partners in ensuring all of the logistics personnel inside those PEOs belong to me in the aviation side and missile side, so that I can make sure that we have that voice so that we can get the right items and minimize that cost. But what it also shows you is that's where all the cost is. So that's where supply chain and other areas we have to become as efficient as possible. PBLs, Perry talked about PBLs. You know, there's a natural hesitancy for some services to do PBLs, even though there's many examples of the savings that are available. The services problem is everybody thinks they're leaving something on the table. Perry said we can give you 20% and maybe more. Well, if we contract for 20% and they do more, then somebody's out there going, well, we should have done for 22%. Yeah, savings is a savings, and as they said, we work through those. We've got a savings can't just be for the service. If it's just for the service, again, you have to have that incentive for industry to provide the item, or else the service will never gain that efficiency. Next slide, please. This slide, build it out too. There's only one thing I kind of wanted to make a comment on that, and it's that poor communication. You heard General Cohn yesterday in his leadoff said, today's world, it's even more important than ever to communicate and communicate effectively. In the times of decreasing budgets, we all want to pull back in and get inside our own foxhole and revert back to the tactical level, because that's where most of us in the service are most comfortable, and that's exactly the wrong thing to do. We've got to reach out and figure out how we, working with all of our partners, can be more effective. Next slide. This is an interesting slide. I think it covers the situation pretty clearly. you notice that incentives are used on both sides of this block. They're in the requirement side, and then they're also in what you've got to have to be effective on these. And I would say that that's very true, but it's got to be incentives on both sides. It can't be all incentives about Army saving money or DOD saving money. It's what we've got to do, and I know OSD has had multiple people out, and leadership of the Army has had people out that says, look, our goal is to save money across the board. If a company can figure out a way to do something 20% more efficiently, we'll split that with them. Our goal is not to take all of the company's profit. It's to figure out ways to make a more effective part or a better part that lasts longer or something else. What I really want to talk about here is that end-to-end visibility, and both Scott and Perry both talked about it a little bit. That, to me, is the most important thing that we've got to do. Unfortunately, some of our systems, as I said, aren't ready yet, and it won't be for another 18 months or so before we think that LMP will be able to fully connect with GCSSA and with EBS and other systems. But in today's world, if I can let you as a manufacturer see from production through the use to the issue and actual artisan usage of the item, I think in many cases manufacturers can manage items and forecast and use S&OP, use supply planning, demand planning. If they have all that data, I think you all can do that just as well as we can. We're trying to manage millions of items, and when you're doing that, there's some inherent washing of data for certain specifics that you all will see and know. Those sub-tier manufacturers, if they only have to buy raw materials at a time when they know they need to produce based on usage in the Army, and the Army's therefore going to have to order more, it may decrease their cost, it may make them more economically viable as we continue to draw down the excess stocks that we're going to have. So I think those things are very important. It's also a huge opportunity for us and with our coalition partners, both back on that triangle and here. Coalition work, FMS, there may be a huge opportunity here. One of the things that our systems don't do well today is support FMS in a timely manner. And there's a lot of opportunities to utilize the stocks that we may have as excess or not necessarily excess, but long supply, I'll put it that way, to utilize those to better support our FMS customers. There is that same opportunity for depot level maintenance and that sort of thing. I think it is a great opportunity for us to collaborate and come together closer, just like I'm talking about with our industry partners. Next slide. And this just goes back to the final slide and kind of a closing. The value of optimization is our ability to continue to execute all the missions that we have within the budgets that we are going to be given. And all of us that are sitting up here at the table and all of you down there will work through this. We have done it before, and we will do it again. We have better tools to allow us to do it if we choose to use them wisely. And we will continue to have better tools. And it's up to us to take care of our nation by using those tools effectively. So, sir?
Thanks very much, Lynn. What I want to do now is we'll get into the question and answer period here. I've got some questions that have been given to me from our illustrious question gatherer down there, and I've kind of passed them out there. But I'm going to ask the first question. It involves something that three of the panel members specifically talked about. Perry talked about PBL, performance-based logistics. Scott talked about DLA trying to get more industry involved in the supply chain, and Lynn just talked about PBLs as well. A four-star and myself are talking, retired four-star, earlier this morning, and he said, hey, Bob, if Coca-Cola can check the demand signal, and every one of these high-speed drink machines we've got out there today that allows their supply chain to understand what the demand is so that every time somebody puts a cup under a Coke machine, he gets what he wants, and how come we can't do that in DOD? And I thought to myself about Apache PBL. I thought about other PBLs we've instituted. I remember Ben Griffin and I worked on a Humvee, get industry to put parts on the production line to do Humvee repair by government employees at the depot. Tire contracts, all these things that we've outsourced and let them deliver based on demand signal. How do we do this going forward? How do we bring that into the Army toolkit and the DLA toolkit more so that we can drive costs down, get better performance, and like you say, Perry, give that extra 20% back to the Army so they can have more platforms and training hours. How do we do this when it's very sensitive about the division of labor with a government and a contractor workforce? I'd appreciate your comments. Perry, could you start it off?
Sure. So within Army aviation specifically, the 50-50 and all of that has been less of an issue than it has been for some of the other services, just because the workloading has been very stable and very predictable. So that's been less of an issue. I will say, from the direct answer to your question, so on Apache PBL, we have had essentially what you're talking about. We've had, over the last decade or so, the ability, because we're responsible for delivering that to the government, we have almost complete transparency. We have the model, we have the forecasting, and we have it not only for the U.S. Army, but we have it for every customer on the planet that flies an Apache. So we can see globally what usage rates are, where the hot points are, where there are issues, and that feeds into a bigger model that allows us to predict very accurately what we need, when we need it, and where we're going to need it, which is kind of what you're talking about. How do we dial that like Coca-Cola does to predict requirements? We can do that today. And where we do it, like Apache PBL, we save money. And you get not only lower costs, but increased readiness levels. The data really does set you free in that way. So, and just one final thing on Apache PBL. So the great opportunity on Apache PBL is that right now that is D-unique components. And General Collier's team, and this is a great example of where General Collier's team and the PEOs are seeing that opportunity to expand that to the broader supply base.
Scott, you want to take a crack at that from a
Real
commodity
quick,
standpoint?
I think two things would add value to that. The first is we have to get past, I buy it into an organic system and run it that way. Vice, I outsource it through a privatization event, and we have several supply chains that are privatized inside DLA where we get the visibility you're talking about. We need the hybrid. We need the vendor-managed inventory inside the organic system where it makes sense to do that. Everything on our shelves is, either DLA managed or managed by the service owners. We need to get where the vendor manages material inside that network. Yeah. Why? Because we want to leverage opportunities, like opportunities for transportation, et cetera. So it's been an all-or-none venture to date. I think we do need to really press the envelope on what those hybrid solutions might be. When we do that, we'll bridge the moats that are around the disparate IT systems that General Collier talked about. Visibility across the supply chain will be achieved when we bring in both ends of the supply chain, the retail system visibility and the vendor visibility, into a much more cohesive network. So I really think that's the next step, and I think those are the partnerships.
Hey, Lynn.
Sir, I agree with both what they said, but I want to give you the two, one downside and one additional opportunity. The additional opportunity is it's not just Army. We need to get this into the joint arena. There's more than enough joint platforms, and I know how much every service has its own mechanism of contracting, which requires its own overhead from manufacturers, which just drives up cost without providing one additional capability to a service. And we have a natural affinity in the Army and in the Air Force and Navy to let somebody else manage some item for us, but joint PBLs are really the next step where we need to go, where systems cross services. The one issue that we have with the Coca-Cola example is the security of our data, and we have a different requirement for and a phobia, right and wrong in some cases, against providing data or letting other people see data because of the sensitivity of it. And how do you ensure that your data is being reasonably secured while you're letting everyone see it, but everyone that's bidding on a contract has to have visibility. Everyone that's providing, all the different support to us has to have it. And that's a tough challenge on the IT side that I don't have the solution for, but that has a hindering factor in this.
Well, thanks very much. I'm going to let a couple of the panel members take it. I'm going to make one comment. I'll take a little bit of liberty here as the moderator. I would say to you that I agree with your comment, Scott, about hybrid. And I think that one of the biggest success I had at DLA was when the AMC commander and myself were accountable to one another to make sure that I was responsible for a supply chain that I use an industry partner to produce in support of a Humvee repair, that I had to be accountable for weapon system readiness, which DLA has a culture of being more of a wholesaler and systems approach. And I think that going forward, there is great opportunity. But I think it's great opportunity when you can set up something, very much like Scott talked about, to get a PBL involved with government touch labor and accountability between the AMC commander and the DLA director. You got the next question.
Yeah, this question actually reinforces the discussion we just had. We have been talking about collaboration and shared information between the government and its suppliers for many years. What's keeping us from executing? It seems like a no-brainer. So why aren't we doing it? Well, I think that statement is true. However, we are doing it in pockets, obviously, from Perry's example here. In reality, we talk about the Army supply chain, but there's actually Army supply chains. There's multiple supply chains, so we have to tackle these one at a time or try to consolidate them as much as possible. But I think it really, so we basically have to broaden these successful examples like Perry talked about and make it a part of the Army culture. But I really think it gets to, the broader collaboration really comes down to trust and viewing the industry partner as part of the team. Not exactly analogous, but I've been at LMI for 25 years now. When we're supporting a client on a particular project, when that client treats us as part of the team and shares information, it's a win-win situation. When they kind of hold us off and say, oh, you're just a support contractor, we'll tell you what we want you to know when we want to know it, that doesn't work. And I think it's the same thing here. We can bring in the aspect of sensitivity of data, and we can get people cleared in industry and bring them as part of the team and make sure that they have the clearances and they live up to, treating the data the correct way. So I think that, in a growing environment like we had the last 10 years, maybe that wasn't something that we were looking to do. But I think the new reality that we're facing is probably going to be a forcing action to make us collaborate more. So hopefully this collaboration will be done more in the future, as basically less resources will require us to do that to be more effective.
Anybody want to comment on Ray's answer?
I think it's fine.
Okay, pretty good rundown. Perry, you got a question?
I do have a question. Let me just comment on one of Ray's observations, though. Whether you want to call it trust or chemistry or collaboration, in all the instances where we have these shared supply chain or through-life support programs, where they work extremely effectively and affordably is where you've got that chemistry, and it really is one team. It's badgeless. It isn't government, industry, and that works. And then I just wanted to respond to Lynn's comment on data sensitivity. That is an issue. We run into that frequently, and the work we do at the 160th, I think we could argue that the data there is extremely sensitive data. Been doing that a couple decades, and as far as I know, I've never had a data migration in the wrong direction. But there are firewalls that have to be put in the system. There also has to be people. You have to have the right people doing those jobs, and it's often people who have done the mission before. So I take your point, and it's real, and it is something we have to work on. Okay, do have a question here, and I think whoever wrote this, and I'll just read it as it's written. As a supplier of Apache Block 3 critical system parts that depend on Army DoD sustainment of my manufacturing facilities, and the Army DoD telling me that industrial-based sustainment is not high on their list of things to do, your supply chain is at serious risk. How do we address this problem so your deliveries are not interrupted? Okay, well, one of the things that I didn't touch on that I should have was the importance of when you talk about a through-life support, one of the big important things that comes out of an agreement like that is your ability to predict down at the second and third tier suppliers, who are often very small suppliers, in some cases one-onlys on the globe producing certain things. Very predictable for them, so they can level load their workforce, they can level load their planning, they can level load their material purchases. This is where industry takes on risk, takes that away from the government having to worry about that, is on us. So that is one of the benefits. Now, to this question specifically, on Apache Block 3, so the next version of Apaches, and I know there have been some worries, but I will tell you that with the leadership at the Lifecycle Management Command, with General Collier's leadership, with him bringing some help from the sustainment folks in Washington, the dollars are there for this. We do have a strategy for deployment, and there will not be an impact. So whoever wrote this, feel free to either find me afterwards or send me a short note, because if there's something else I need to know that you think we've missed, I want to know it. But as of last week, we've got an approach for this that works.
I've got a question here, and maybe I'll just go right down the line here for a quick response. Maybe first thing that kind of comes to your mind, and this is a question that everybody should kind of comment on. The question is, what is the sequester or the continuing resolution impact on the ability of the organizations that you represent to retain, military, civil service, recruiting skilled workforce? What is that? What's the impact going to be, if any? And we'll just go right down the line very quickly.
Well, we're hoping there's no impact, obviously, but we're prepared to perhaps, in our case, we may have to hire people that we call hourly employees more than fully salaried employees, so that they're on the bench, but we don't have to carry them in the meantime. So I think from the LMI perspective, that's the biggest thing we're facing as far as the type of employee we have.
So we are in the process of doing that analysis, and like Mr. Scheibel, we're all hopeful that there will be a solution, but hope isn't a strategy, and so we do have a plan in place to address that, and without a doubt, there will be impacts in terms of workforce reductions, and there will be impacts in our second and third tiers as well. So it's one of those things where there are ways to get around that, and too lengthy to go into here, but it does involve flexibility in procuring service, but that introduces risk. And so you've got to find the balance in that, and we're in the process of putting that plan together now, but very hopeful that we can avert it.
Scott?
Inside DLA, we're going to have to marry up to our service customers. It'll be a different answer. If you reduce third and fourth quarter maintenance at your industrial sites, we'll have to take the supply support to that and marry up to that. It'll be a different solution set for each of the services, so we're sitting waiting really for their solutions to come to us so we can then tailor those. Navy not repairing a ship at Norfolk and on from there. So it's going to be important that we stay locked at the hip on this and certainly reduce as we go down forward.
Lynn?
Could I just have a go back on that? So, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
ma'am.
sir.
By all
The one thing that's a good reminder is that often these parts that we're talking about for things like Apache, Chinooks, Blackhawks, whatever, 3-year, 4-year lead time. So there's a big chunk that you can't affect that's already in the pipeline. And if you try to affect that, there's a huge cost that goes along with that, and it's a non-value added cost. So we're looking at all that and looking at how to address that as well. Sorry.
Yeah, I would just tell you that, obviously sequestration and CRA are going to have an effect on all of us. The biggest effect is, if you go back to the second chart that we had, we all said we knew we were going to do a drawdown. We know that op tempo is going to shrink some as we come out of the operational environment in CENTCOM. And we had plans to be able to execute that effectively and do an effective and efficient drawdown. And what this is going to do is force us to make some decisions that may be less than sub-optimized decisions based on these short-term targets instead of being able to execute that long-term plan and execute something on a very close near-term basis. The thing we've always prided ourselves in is taking care of our people and doing the right things for our people over time. And if you have a strategic plan that allows you to do that, to reset less or to change the timelines that allow you to do that, you can take care of your people. This is going to hurt our ability to do that. That's probably the most significant portion from the AMC AMCOM side.
Thanks, Lynn. I got a question for the panel. I think anyone that might want to take a listen. We just talked, I think you were just kind of skirting on it there, Perry. It says, any effort on the reinventing of the admin and procurement lead time process, alt-PALT, as we used to say down in, back on the Army staff in the late 90s when we were trying to get as much efficiency as we could. The questioner says, in times of uncertainty, the times required for admin and procurement lead times get longer. Any comment about that? What should we do about it? Should we focus on it as we just accept it? Yeah, go ahead, take a look at it.
Okay. It is a huge cost. And it is, as Perry said, extremely long. In different systems, it takes different amounts of time, complexity and that sort of thing. But right now, ALT, PLT combined is in many cases, a year, it's 365 to 400 days long. If you can cut that by 10%, you save 10% of that inventory requirement that's out there in the supply system. And we're talking about doing engines, the T700 engines more effectively. You got $5 billion worth of engines on wings, and you got another $2.5 billion worth of engines in the supply system. If we make sure that from the operational level all the way back, we are doing maintenance at the appropriate level for those engines, and we bring alt-PALT down, we can save $1 billion there. And that $1 billion allows you to reset 750 new aircraft. So there are huge trade-offs that we have to do, and we have to find every way we can to bring those down. It's doable. It's hard. There's nothing easy about it, but it is that collaboration with our partners and letting them see that visibility and be in on the supply and demand planning along with us.
Okay. Anybody else got a question here? Let's kind of go. Scott, you got one in front of you?
Yeah.
We'll do two more. And then
The question is, field returns typically consume far more labor hours to process than receipts from suppliers or new procurement. How will DDC resource these labor hours in a time of declining Defense Working Capital Fund resources? It's a great question. First of all, year to date, and as as General Collier stated earlier, we had planned for decreased workload for FY13, and we're on target to do that inside DOI distribution. We had a $358 million reduction over the next 5 years, but we're 9% below our workload to date in FY13 against our plan. And what we do is we leverage, and what field returns allow us to do is it's not a spike in the workload. You come in on a Tuesday morning, your normal workload's 10,000 issues, and you have 30,000 drop. We don't control that. The warfighter controls it, and by what he orders, when he orders it. The field returns can be used to balance that workload, and that's how we use it. We capture those, we pattern those to the right location so that when workload is either in a valley or a peak, we can obviously adjust accordingly. And that's how we meet those types of requirements, particularly when it concerns the field returns.
Lynn?
Sir, I got a question here, and it's a great question. I appreciate somebody asking. The past 12 years of war have resulted in a lot of capability overlap and duplication. As the budget decreases, how can the Army better leverage the capabilities of DLA and others? Are we ready to give up force structure to allow more efficient organizations to do their job and increase efficiency? You know, the key to some of this is there's nothing that draws services closer together or farther apart than a budget, you know, a constrained budget. And in this case, it's got to draw us closer together. And I have said multiple times, and usually I'm in a green suit, I've always said that if you're wearing the Army uniform, there is nobody anywhere in the world that can do any job better than we can. We are the best at everything. And that's the mindset that we have, and that's what we train soldiers. They're the best at their task and everything they do. And one of the things that we have to recognize is there are other tasks that people can do maybe not quite as good as we can, maybe only 98% as good, or 95. Maybe DLA is only 95% as effective as the Army is. But you know, if we can give them mission set and leave the money in where only, keep the money in the core competencies where the Army needs it to be effective, then that's the things we've got to look at and figure out where those overlaps are and what can we give away and let somebody else do so that we can put the right amounts of money into our core competencies that no one else can do. And I think this economic time, hopefully, with the systems that we have, with the people that we have that have been through, you know, there's a lot of guys that have been in war together from multiple services and have seen the capabilities and strengths of the other services and met people and have friends. And again, those are all things that drive you closer together, and that's where we've got to go.
Well, I would summarize my comment after listening to a great panel discussion. I would say that I learned a great thing when I was in 2 COCOMs, and that is you don't have to own it to control it. And the Army has got the powerful switch when it comes to sustainment and logistics because it's got a 4-star command, which is awesome in every respect, and it can control the entire enterprise as it comes down to your weapon systems platform. So don't ever underestimate the fact that you have to own everything to control the outcome and the output at the other end. Combat arms officers are used to that because they're used to controlling everything that they don't own anyway. Now look, I want to have a great comment here from my